At Christmas dinner, my own daughter looked me in the eye and said, "You're dead to me?" I sat there, my heart breaking, every sacrifice I'd made flashing before my eyes. Every late night, every dollar earned, every moment spent building this family. That night, I made a decision. But you won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, hit the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Christmas was always sacred in our family. My late wife, God rest her soul, ensured it. She believed that no matter how hard the year had been, no matter what we'd lost or gained, we would gather around the table, share a meal, and remember what it meant to be a family. After she passed, I tried to keep that tradition alive for my daughter, Anna, and her children. I wanted them to feel the warmth, the sense of belonging, the assurance that no matter what happened outside those walls, inside, we were safe. I worked my whole life to give Anna everything I never had. I grew up poor, the kind of poor that leaves you hungry and cold, the kind that makes you promise yourself your children will never know the same. I kept that promise. Every hour I could find, I worked. Days on construction sites, nights fixing broken machines, weekends hauling bricks for men half my age. I never complained. Every ache in my back, every callus on my hands, every missed meal was worth it when I saw Anna smile. She was my only child, my pride. I remember her first steps, the way she'd run into my arms after school, the way she'd beg me to read her one more story before bed. I was there for every scraped knee, every school play, every heartbreak. When she wanted to go to college, I sold my old car, took out loans, and worked overtime until my hands shook. When she married, I paid for the wedding, the reception, every flower, and every plate. When she and her husband wanted a home, I co-signed the loan, put down the deposit, and made sure they never started their marriage in debt. Even after she had children of her own, I was there. I helped with the mortgage, fixed the leaky roof, mowed the lawn, and brought gifts for the grandkids every time I visited. I wanted them to remember their grandfather with warmth, not distance. I told them stories about their grandmother, about the old days, about the sacrifices that built the life they now enjoyed. But as the years passed, I started to notice a change. Anna grew distant. At first, it was just a sigh when I repeated a story, or an eye roll when I offered advice. I told myself she was tired, that raising kids and working was hard. I tried not to take it personally, but the small slights grew sharper. At dinners, she'd cut me off. "Dad, we've heard this already." The grandchildren started to mimic her, glancing at their mother before listening to me, sometimes giggling when I spoke. Still, I endured it. I remembered the nights I stayed up with her when she was sick, the mornings I walked miles to work so she could have bus fare. I told myself, she's stressed. She doesn't mean it. But deep down, I felt the distance growing, like winter settling in for good. Her husband, Mark, was polite at first, but as time went on, he followed her lead. When I spoke too long, I'd catch him smirking or exchanging a look with Anna. Once, when I struggled to remember the name of an old friend, he muttered, "Losing it, huh?" And they both laughed. I pretended not to hear. I tried to keep the peace, to be the quiet, helpful presence in their lives. I brought photo albums, hoping to share family history. But Anna would sigh, "Dad, we don't need old pictures cluttering the house." I felt myself shrinking, my stories turning to clutter, my presence to an obligation. But I held on to hope. I believed that one day she would remember the sacrifices, the love, the foundation I had built for her. I believed that family meant something, that respect was not optional, that a father's place at the table was sacred. Then came Christmas. I put on my best shirt, polished my shoes, and brought gifts for the grandchildren. I arrived early, helped set the table, and tried to ignore the tension in the air. The meal was beautiful. Anawas is always a good cook. The grandchildren laughed and played. Mark poured the wine, and for a moment, I let myself believe that everything was as it should be. But beneath the surface, I felt the cold. Anna barely spoke to me. Mark avoided my eyes, and the grandchildren were restless, glancing at their mother before answering my questions. I tried to share a story about their grandmother, hoping to bring a little warmth to the table. That's when it happened. Never imagined that a single sentence from my own daughter would shatter everything I'd built and set in motion a revenge that would change our family forever. I can still hear her voice, sharp and cold, cutting through the laughter and clinking of glasses. "You're dead to me." The words hung in the air, heavier than any silence I'd ever known. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. Surely my daughter, the child I'd raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice I had, couldn't have said that to me. Not here. Not on Christmas. Not in front of her children and husband. But there was no mistake. Her eyes were hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark didn't say a word. He just looked down at his plate, a smirk flickering at the corner of his mouth. The grandchildren froze, their forks halfway to their mouths, eyes darting between their mother and me. The room, once filled with warmth and the scent of roast and cinnamon, now felt like a tomb. I sat there, my fork suspended in midair, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rest of the conversation as it stumbled forward, awkward and forced. Anna didn't look at me again. She just moved on, as if I'd never been there at all. The others followed her lead, and I realized, with a cold clarity, that I was invisible at my own family's table. I tried to swallow the pain, to keep my face calm. But inside, I was breaking. Memories flashed through my mind, her first steps, her graduation, the nights I'd stayed up with her when she was sick, the years I'd worked myself to the bone so she'd never know hunger or fear. All of it erased in a single sentence. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food. I barely heard the laughter that returned, brittle and forced. I watched as Anna laughed with her children, as Mark poured more wine, as the grandchildren whispered and giggled, casting nervous glances my way. I felt like a ghost, haunting a life that no longer belonged to me. After dinner, I tried to help clear the table, but Anna brushed past me. "Just leave it, Dad. We've got it." Her voice was flat, final. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching as she and Mark gathered plates, their backs turned to me. The grandchildren disappeared upstairs, their footsteps echoing down the hall. I wandered back to the living room, my hands trembling. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the Christmas tree, the lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall. I thought about leaving right then, just slipping out the door and disappearing into the night. But something kept me rooted to the spot. A stubborn hope, maybe, or just the weight of habit. Eventually, Anna came in, her arms crossed. "Are you going to sit there all night?" she asked, her tone sharp. "If you're tired, you can go. We're fine here." I looked up at her, searching for any sign of the daughter I'd loved, the little girl who used to run into my arms. But she was gone, replaced by a woman I barely recognized. "I'll go," I said quietly, standing up and reaching for my coat. My hands shook as I buttoned it, the fabric suddenly heavy on my shoulders. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look at me as I walked to the door. Mark glanced up from the kitchen, his expression unreadable. The grandchildren were nowhere to be seen. I stepped out into the cold night, the air biting at my cheeks. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and music drifting from inside. I realized, with a finality that cut deeper than any insult, that I was no longer part of that world. I walked to my car, the keys cold in my hand. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the house I'd helped build, the family I'd sacrificed everything for. I thought about driving away, never looking back. But the pain was too raw, the betrayal too fresh. I drove through the empty streets, the city lights blurring past. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and the place where I'd lost everything. I ended up at a small park on the edge of town, the kind of place where I used to take Anna when she was a child. I sat on a bench, the cold seeping through my coat, and let the tears come. I cried for the years I'd given, for the love that had been thrown away, for the man I'd become, a stranger in his own life. As the night wore on, I thought about what had happened, about the words Anna had said, about the way she'd looked at me as if I were nothing. I realized that this wasn't just a moment of anger or stress. This was the truth she'd been carrying for years, finally spoken aloud. I thought about going back, about begging for forgiveness, about trying to fix what had been broken. But I knew, deep down, that nothing I said or did would change the way she saw me. I was dead to her, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to let her go. But as I sat there, shivering in the darkness, a new feeling began to take root. It started as a flicker, then grew into a steady flame. I realized that I didn't have to accept her verdict. I didn't have to spend the rest of my life begging for scraps of love and respect. I could choose dignity. I could choose myself. And in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I had spent a lifetime giving everything to my family. Now, for the first time, I was about to take something back, and Anna would never see it coming. I sat in my car for a long time that night, the engine off, the world outside silent except for the occasional gust of wind rattling the bare branches overhead. I replayed Anna's words again and again, "You're dead to me." Each time the sting grew sharper, but so did my resolve. I realized I'd been living in a kind of sleep, letting my love for my daughter blind me to the truth. I was no longer wanted, no longer respected, no longer family in her eyes. I thought about all the years I'd spent sacrificing for her, the double shifts, the missed meals, the holidays spent working so she could have gifts under the tree. I remembered the pride I'd felt watching her graduate, the joy of walking her down the aisle, the hope I'd carried when she became a mother herself. I'd believed that love and sacrifice would be enough to keep us close. But I was wrong. As the night deepened, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could keep chasing her approval, keep showing up to be humiliated, keep letting her and her husband treat me like a burden. Or I could finally stand up for myself, reclaim my dignity, and show her that a father's love is not a license for cruelty. I started the car and drove home, my mind racing with possibilities. The house was dark and cold when I arrived, but I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once helped Anna with her homework, and pulled out a stack of old folders from the drawer. Deeds, bank statements, insurance policies, and the will I'd updated after my wife passed. I realized, with a jolt, that Anna's name was everywhere. On the house, the car, the family fund. She'd grown so used to my support, so sure of her place in my legacy, that she'd forgotten who had built it all. I stared at those papers, the weight of my life's work pressing down on me. I thought about the way Anna had dismissed me, the way Mark had laughed, the way my grandchildren had learned to look through me as if I were invisible. I felt anger, yes, but also a strange sense of clarity. I didn't owe them anything more. I had already given enough. That night, I made a list. Everything that was still in my name. Everything Anna and her family took for granted. The house she lived in, the car she drove, the fund she dipped into when bills got too heavy. I realized I still held the keys, literally and figuratively. I could take it all back with a few signatures, a few phone calls, a few quiet decisions. I slept little, but when I woke, I felt lighter than I had in years. I called my lawyer, a man who'd handled my affairs for decades. His voice was calm and steady as I explained what I wanted. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "It's a big step." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "I want her name off everything. The will, the accounts, the deeds. I want the house prepared for sale. I want the car transferred back to me. I want the fund closed. And I want it done quietly." He didn't argue. He just said, "I'll get started right away." The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I signed documents, transferred titles, and closed accounts. Each signature felt like a small act of liberation, a way of reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd given away over the years. I didn't tell Anna. I didn't answer her calls. I let the silence grow, let her wonder where I'd gone. I packed a small suitcase, just enough clothes for a few weeks, my favorite books, and the photo of my wife I kept on my nightstand. I left the rest behind. I didn't need much. For the first time in decades, I was packing for myself, not for someone else's needs. Before I left, I walked through the house one last time. I touched the doorway where I'd marked Anna's height as a child, the kitchen where my wife used to cook, the living room where we'd spent so many Christmas mornings. I felt a pang of grief, but also a sense of closure. This chapter was over. I locked the door behind me, slipped the keys into my pocket, and walked out into the cold morning air. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I simply disappeared. I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town, paid in cash, and settled into a quiet routine. I walked in the mornings, read in the afternoons, and spent my evenings by the window, watching the world go by. I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Meanwhile, my lawyer worked quickly. Within a week, Anna's name was gone from every document. The house was listed for sale. The car was transferred back to me. The fund was closed. My legacy was secure, protected from the people who had forgotten what it meant to be family. I knew it wouldn't take long for Anna to notice. I imagined her confusion, her anger, her disbelief as she realized what I'd done. I didn't relish her pain, but I didn't regret my decision. She had made her choice at that dinner table. Now, I was making mine. And as I sat in that quiet hotel room, I realized that sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's just walking away and taking everything they thought was theirs with you. Anna had no idea what was coming, but soon she would learn that a father's silence can be the loudest answer of all. The days in the hotel passed quietly, but my mind was anything but still. I kept the curtains drawn, the phone on silent, and my world small. I didn't want to see anyone from my old life. I didn't want to explain myself. I wanted Anna to feel the absence she had created, to realize that the foundation she'd built her comfort on was gone. My lawyer kept me updated with short professional calls. The house is on the market. The car is back in your name. The accounts are closed. Everything is moving as you requested. Each update was a small victory, a reminder that I still had power, that I was not as helpless as Anna believed. I imagined the moment she would discover the truth. Maybe it would be when she tried to pay a bill and found the family fund empty. Maybe it would be when the real estate agent called to schedule a showing for the house she thought would always be hers. Maybe it would be when she realized the car she drove was no longer insured under my name. I pictured her confusion turning to panic, her certainty crumbling as she realized how much she had taken for granted. I didn't answer her calls. At first they came once or twice a day. Short, annoyed voicemails. "Dad, where are you? This isn't funny. Call me back." Then, as the days passed and the news began to reach her, the messages changed. "Dad, the bank says my name isn't on the account anymore. Did you do something? We need to talk." Her voice was sharper, tinged with fear. And finally, desperation. "Please, Dad, don't do this. I didn't mean it that way. You can't just erase me from everything. I'm your daughter." I listened to each message, but I never called back. I let the silence speak for me. I wanted her to feel what I had felt at that table. Unseen, unheard, unimportant. I wanted her to understand that respect is not a birthright, that love is not a blank check, and that a father's patience is not endless. Mark called too, but his tone was different. Less pleading, more angry. "You're tearing this family apart. You're being cruel. You're going to regret this." I shook my head at his words. They had mocked me, dismissed me, and treated me like a burden. Now, when the consequences arrived, I was the villain in their story. But I knew the truth. This wasn't cruelty. This was justice. This was family revenge, served cold and quiet. I spent my days walking the quiet streets near the hotel, breathing in the cold air, letting the tension drain from my body. I found a small cafe where no one knew my name. I sat by the window, sipping coffee, watching strangers go about their lives. For the first time in years, I felt invisible in a good way, free from judgment, free from expectation, free from the weight of being unwanted. At night, I sat in my room, the photo of my wife on the nightstand. I spoke to her softly, telling her what I'd done, how I'd finally stood up for myself, how I'd chosen dignity over humiliation. I felt her presence, steady and proud, as if she approved. The paperwork moved quickly. The house sold faster than I expected, and the money waste transferred to a new account in my name alone. I made arrangements for the rest of my assets, setting up donations to causes I cared about, making sure that what I'd built would go to people who valued it. I left nothing for Anna and Mark. Not out of spite, but out of principle. They had shown me who they were. I believed them. The days grew longer as winter melted into spring. I found myself settling into a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around waiting for a phone call or an apology. I tended a small garden behind my cabin, coaxing life from the cold earth. Each green shoot felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that even after the harshest season, something new could grow. I saw families in town, fathers with their children, grandparents with their grandkids. Sometimes it stung, but more often it made me smile. I had learned that family drama and betrayal don't have to define the rest of your life. You can choose what you carry forward and what you leave behind. Anna's letter sat on my desk, a symbol of both pain and hope. I reread it on lonely nights, searching for sincerity between the lines. I wondered if she truly understood the lesson, or if regret was just another form of longing for what she'd lost. I didn't rush to answer her again. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to know that forgiveness is not a door you can walk through without knocking. I spent more time with the people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give. The neighbors I helped with repairs, the volunteers at the food bank, the children who smiled when I handed them a warm meal. These were the new threads in the fabric of my life. I realized that respect, kindness, and gratitude were the true currency of family, not blood or inheritance. One afternoon, I received a call from a local school. They'd heard about my work at the food bank and asked if I'd come speak to the students about resilience and family. I hesitated at first, but then agreed. Standing in front of those young faces, I told my story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in self-worth and boundaries. I spoke about sacrifice, about the importance of respect, about how love without dignity is just another form of control. I told them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from those who hurt you, even if they share your name. The students listened, some with wide eyes, some with tears. When I finished, a young girl raised her hand and asked, "Did you ever stop loving your daughter?" I smiled, feeling the truth settle in my chest. "No," I said, "but I learned to love myself too." And that made all the difference. The applause was gentle, but it filled the room. I left the school that day feeling lighter, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been set down. Back at my cabin, I wrote in my journal, reflecting on the journey. I realized that my story was not just about family betrayal or revenge. It was about reclaiming my own life, about finding justice in the quiet act of choosing peace over pain. I thought of Anna, of the grandchildren I might never see again, of the home I'd left behind. I hoped that one day they would understand the lesson I'd tried to teach. Not through anger or punishment, but through the example of a man who refused to be diminished by those he loved. As the sun set behind the mountains, I stood on my porch, breathing in the cool air. I felt gratitude for the years I'd given, for the love I'd shared, and for the strength it took to walk away. I knew that my legacy would not be measured by the house I'd built or the money I'd saved, but by the dignity I'd reclaimed and the peace I'd found. With each new day, I learned that the truest form of justice is living well, even after betrayal, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let anyone else write the ending to your story. Summer arrived in the mountains, and with it, a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in years. The days were warm, the nights cool and quiet. I spent my mornings walking the trails, my afternoons reading on the porch, and my evenings watching the stars emerge one by one. The pain of Anna's betrayal had faded into something softer, a scar, not a wound. I had learned to live with it, to let it remind me of the strength it took to choose myself. Occasionally, I would hear from distant relatives or old friends asking if I regretted what I'd done. My answer was always the same. I regretted the way things ended, but not the decision to reclaim my dignity. I had given everything I could, and when it was no longer enough, I chose peace over pain. That was my justice. That was my revenge. I never stopped loving Anna. I never stopped hoping that one day she would truly understand the lesson I'd tried to teach her. But I no longer waited by the phone or checked the mailbox with anxious hope. I had let go of the need for her approval, and in doing so, I found a freedom I never thought possible. I continued to volunteer, to help where I could, to share my story with those who needed to hear it. I saw the impact it had on young people learning about respect, on parents struggling with toxic family drama, on anyone who had ever felt invisible at their own table. My story became more than just a tale of betrayal and revenge. It became a message of hope, resilience, and the power of self-respect. If you've listened this far, thank you. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, if you've ever been pushed aside or made to feel small, know this: you are not alone. You have the right to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to walk away from those who refuse to give it. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet act of choosing yourself. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps more people find these stories of survival, justice, and family. And if you're still searching for your own peace, don't give up. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is living well and refusing to let anyone else define your worth. Thank you for being part of my journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never forget the value of your own dignity.